Thank you so much for joining us on Education Station. We have a very lively discussion, and I'm very grateful to have two people with me here on Education Station. I'm joined by Ahmed Fouad Akhatib, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and director of Realign for Palestine, and also a friend of Channel 8, someone I've known for a while, Professor Gregory Brown over at UNLV. Him and I have talked for several stories. He's a history professor, and so we're going to engage in a lively discussion now about what's happening in the Middle East. And so we're just going to get right to it. There's a war going on in the Middle East, and I want to talk about the impact it has to Southern Nevada when it comes to tourism and the economy. Now, is it fair to say that the issues of energy, commerce, and travel is the only viewpoint that Americans have when it comes to the Middle East?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us on. And I want to just on behalf of the university express our gratitude to Ahmed for coming to Las Vegas to help us get his perspective, which he'll tell us about, I think. I think it is fair. It is not the only issues that are of concern to a lot of people. I think one thing to keep in mind is that it is, generally speaking, we think of the Middle East, a pretty broad region that stretches from North Africa up to Southern Europe and across to Asia. And in that sense, it has historically been a really geostrategically central location for commerce, for travel. And this dates back to the Egyptian Empire and the Hittite Empire, which to a certain extent fought over this region. And subsequent empires, including Syrian Empire, including Greeks and Romans and the Ottoman Empire, and then eventually the British Empire, really wanted to control this because of its strategic significance in terms of travel and commerce. The energy kind of comes in really at the end of the First World War, when petroleum, what we think of as gas that powers internal combustion engines, was found to be abundant and could be extracted. And that, to a certain extent, is what we think of as gas. The involvement, therefore, for the Western world had really been, for the last 100 years, primarily around access to that resource.
And I also think that the Middle East has proven time again and again to be a topic that people usually forget about until there's a crisis, until there's a war, until there's something that is in the headlines that either just dominates the news cycle, that dominates the economic cycles. We see it at the gas pump. We see the impact it has on people's ability to fill their tanks and still feel confident about their economic stability and future. I've been to Las Vegas many times in the past, and I understand that hospitality is central to the Southern Nevada economy, and I have concerns about the knock-on effects of the war in Iran and in the Middle East in terms of the amount of travel that we'll see coming from Europe, coming from other states, coming from other nations, indeed, and whether or not that'll impact the occupancy rates at let me restate this, whether or not that'll impact the occupancy rates at hotels, or whether or not the car rental businesses will be the same, whether or not the unemployment rate will tick up. So there's a lot that this war could certainly bring to the local economy. But it is also my hope that this could be an opportunity for folks to learn more about a region that they may not have thought about otherwise, and enrich their understanding of the Middle East for a variety of helpful reasons.
All right, so we're going to use that point to segue. I know we're going to talk about it more after this break, but the war in Iran, how does that affect the cause of the Palestinian people? Like, can you connect the two?
Well, certainly. I'm originally from the Gaza Strip, where I grew up until the age of 15, and have had family there and a personal stake in what has unfolded. But the Gaza Strip has been ground zero for what has been unfolding in the Middle East for the last 2.5 years. This began with Hamas's terror attack on October 7th, 2023, against Israel. It was an attack starting in Gaza meant to trigger the beginning of the end of the state of Israel. And instead, the state of Israel, with the support of the United States and others, went on the offense and actually ended the so-called axis of resistance in the form of Hamas, in the form of Hezbollah in Lebanon, in the form of the Islamic Republic of Iran right now being under attack. And so the Palestinian issue has actually been core and central in triggering the series of events that led to this very war. And it may forever change the landscape, either leading to a permanent impasse when it comes to the Israel and Palestine discourse, or potentially leading to some kind of an opening that could trigger a new future for both peoples. And that's where I've been focusing a lot of my efforts over the last 2.5 years.
And Professor Brown, I want to bring you into this conversation because connect the two to an American audience as well, like the Iranian war and what the cause of the Palestinians, but also for Israel as well, and being able to protect itself in that region.
So I would say a couple of things. I mean, number one, to reinforce the point that Ahmed just made when he talked about the resistance, the Muqawama, these are a series of different militias or quasi-state actors that are financed and largely under the control of the Iranian regime, of the IRGC. And in that sense, therefore, the Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, other militia groups largely exist from the Iranian standpoint as allies in their attempt to mobilize the Islamic world around the idea of a final apocalyptic war with Israel. So therefore, the extent to which anything concerning the United States' policy with respect to Iran kind of does hinge on the extent to which Iran can or cannot represent itself as the leader in that kind of global conflict. It's also, I think, worth noting that the specific bodies of water surrounding this area are quite important to kind of keep distinct. So there's a lot of talk right now about a very small international waterway which is between the Arabian Peninsula and the country of Qatar and Iran. And that waterway, which is known as the Straits of Hormuz, has been largely what's been contested. That's an international waterway. That's not Iranian territory. So insofar as there's a United States interest, the United States has long been one of the most active countries in keeping international commerce open. And in the late 1980s, when Iran was fighting an extended war with Iraq, the United States did intervene militarily to keep the straits open. So that in that sense, this is a continuation of a longstanding U.S. concern about facilitating global commerce. Another point to just add about the geography at the other end of what we consider the Middle East, which is the sort of shores of the Mediterranean, the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. What we think of as the Gaza Strip is a strip of territory that's actually among the oldest continuously inhabited areas in the world and has been contested by a variety of different empires, as I noted. And the reason it kind of exists as it does now largely has to do with the Egyptian war against the Ottomans in the 1830s, when Egypt came in and, in effect, when there was an end to that conflict brokered by the British in 1840, that line effectively is the territory, which is significant to know because I think there's often a sense that people don't understand what is this territory, where do these places come from? And that one in particular is really at the kind of, we might say, crossroads of a lot of different both maritime and overseas trade and travel routes for literally thousands of years.
Wow, okay. So we're going to continue this conversation and focus next on the peace in the Middle East. We're just going to take a quick commercial break. Thank you so much for watching Education Station. I'm Joshua Peguero. We're here to continue this conversation on peace in the Middle East, effectively. So I'm going to start with Ahmed. If you can just tell me about your personal experience, because I read that you had 33 family members, unfortunately, killed. And so I'm going to just have you share your experience. And again, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. And so that's what propelled me and motivated me to want to participate in what I am calling the building of the future trajectory for the Palestinian people. And what happened is that a series of Israeli airstrikes destroyed both of my childhood households or homes in the Gaza Strip, in Gaza City in particular. I lost family members, some of whom made it out on the first strike, but didn't make it in subsequent strikes. My brother is still in the Gaza Strip. I got my mom is out, my in-laws, I got some of them out, my nieces and nephews. And instead of succumbing to the rage of revenge and hatred and the desire to continue the cycle of violence and killing and incitement, I wanted to honor their legacy by doing something different, something meaningful, both at a personal level, but at a bigger picture political level, if you will. And so that's where I decided to connect with victims of October 7th on the other side, on the Israeli side, and trying to build common ground and build bridges. And that's not kumbaya. That's not easy to do. That's very difficult and takes a lot of strength and focus and commitment. But thankfully, as a result of the success of that work, it evolved into connecting with policymakers. It evolved into writing, speaking engagements, traveling around the world, briefing policymakers in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, or around the European capitals. And so, to me, peace in the Middle East is not just an abstract concept that has eluded us for decades. It is a necessity to save what remains of my family, to spare future generations what myself, I've experienced the wars myself in the Gaza Strip. I'm deaf in my left ear from an Israeli bombing that killed two of my friends and almost killed me. What my parents experienced, what their parents and my grandparents, what my nieces and nephews. I mean, there's generational trauma. So this is real, and I have every interest in wanting to stop it. So that's number one. Number two is to actually reframe peace as a courageous and a necessary evolution. It's not cowardly as Hamas and the elements of the so-called pro-Palestine community have unfortunately made it out to be. Peace is courageous. Peace is hard. Peace takes a lot of strength. And so there's a rebranding of peace as just the ethos around peace. And then third and finally, it's to come up with pragmatic, realistic solutions that are achievable, are attainable, are doable, and work within the confines of the circumstances we face right now.
So, Professor Brown, what do you make of his efforts? Because I know you had a concerted, I would say, campaign to try at UNLV since the October 7th attacks to, in a way, help people understand a little bit more the history of the Middle East. And I know there were student protesters, and you're aware of what happened at UNLV when they drove out a UNLV visiting Israeli professor who was just there to talk about black holes. But you made this concerted effort to try to widen the conversation and dialogue. So what do you make of what he's saying?
So I have found Ahmed's work really impressive from when I first came across him when he was writing opinion articles. And it's important to note he's been doing this work for more than 10 years, not just since 2023. And one of the things that he's talked a lot about that I agree with fully is the idea of radical pragmatism, of really focusing on those things which can bring solutions and identifying those things that create division. And so for me as a historian, for instance, subtlety, nuance, complications, that's what I teach. There is no way in which you can look at the history of the Middle East or anywhere else and get clear guidance about how do we solve problems in the present. You can understand how people approach those problems. And I think what Ahmed has tried to do is often find things where there is a mutual interest. And one example, and perhaps he'll talk about it, is talking about commercial infrastructure, about creating an international airport in the Gaza Strip that would be jointly operated or at least overseen by the Palestinian government and Israeli, or there are other ideas that are, for the moment, really off the table of a common canal. And I think this is very, very important if you look historically in Europe, where I teach European history. Hundreds of years of cultural and national conflict were really resolved by shared infrastructure and commercial relations.
And so, before we segue to the other topic of what the future of the Middle East looks like, tell me about this commercial infrastructure. Like, can realistically, and I know it's all about pragmatism, but do you see an airport being operated jointly between Israel and Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, so the ethos, the idea, the underpinning behind a lot of these proposals that I've been promoting for years now is greater than just a seaport or an airport built on an artificial peninsula made of the rubble, or an internationally run Israeli-approved airfield, or a whole host of other projects that I've been championing. The idea is that there very much so is a need for Gaza to be connected to the outside world. It has been sealed off. It has not been connected, in large part, because of Hamas's control, Hamas being an Islamist terror organization that unfortunately many still wrongfully consider a resistance organization. It is not. It is a terrorist organization. But so 70% of Gazans have not left the Gaza Strip. Gaza has, before October 7th, had an estimated 2.3 million people living in a small piece of land. Most Gazans have grown up with 8 hours of electricity a day, highly polluted water, 50% unemployment percentages with 70% youth unemployment. And so my belief is that a combination of a change in the narrative away from Hamas's resistance narrative and toward the nation-building narrative to say enough. We've been down this road for many decades, and it has gotten us nothing, coupled with the establishment of infrastructure that can really jumpstart a Palestinian economy that is connected to Israel, connected to Egypt, connected to the Gulf, connected to even ideas that Presidents Biden and Trump have promoted, something called IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, that connects the world really in a way that competes with China's Belt and Road initiatives. That, to me, is what's going to be transformative for the Gaza Strip, providing alternatives to violence, providing an opportunity for people to be invested in seeing Gaza succeed away from violence. And so, yes, I believe that if the totality of the aforementioned is presented not as a piecemeal project here and there, but as a vision for nation building, it can and will be compelling, even though there are still many other outstanding political issues. But this is where radical pragmatism kicks in. I can't solve these political issues, but I can make people's lives better in certain ways, and in so doing, open up the possibilities for healing and reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis in the Gaza Strip.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back after this. Welcome back to Education Station. I'm Joshua Peguero. So we're going to get right to it. The last topic, thank you for those who have remained with us, is the future of the Middle East. So I'm going to start with Professor Brown here. You heard the conversation we just had before we went to break about tying the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
Sure. So one of the things that Ahmed talked about just at the end of the last segment, the IMEC corridor that would go from sort of Central Asia all the way into Europe, would create a trade route that would allow goods and people to bypass some of the choke points, such as the Straits of Hormuz that we talked about earlier. Straits of Hormuz being controlled by Iran primarily punishes Saudi Arabia, and it punishes people and countries that are customers of their exports. Likewise, the Suez Canal and the Red Sea have been subject to bombing by the Houthis. So opening up commercial relations as well as travel in a way that would be not as dependent upon some of these unstable regimes and those that are tied to ideologies would be in the long term really important for Americans, for Southern Nevada, for Europeans, for the rest of the world.
And I want to add that we started the conversation in the spirit of discussing how the conflict in the Middle East and the war impacts Southern Nevada and how it impacts us here domestically. And one of the things that, unfortunately, as was the case with Hamas and October 7th in Gaza, is that we're yet again seeing another wave of division, divisive rhetoric, hateful, insightful language that is really getting us nowhere. We're seeing people taking the side of the Islamic Republic of Iran, people that are angry with the United States and therefore they're standing with dictatorships and Islamist entities and organization. We're also seeing people on the other side who are going all in on the need to only engage in warfare as if that's the only tool of statecraft. And I worry about the long-term impact of that in terms of our ability to have civic discourse in the United States and on college campuses in particular. I worry about our inability to celebrate our diversity across our differences, across our disagreements. I worry about the war in the Middle East dividing us once again along a fault line that unfortunately has been growing ever so wider for the last 2.5 years. And so my desire, my call to action among many is to start by, is to ask folks to learn a little bit more about the topics before they develop such strong opinions and feelings. Pick up a book or look at YouTube videos or listen to a show or a conversation like the ones we're having. When you're faced with with an opinion that you don't agree with, ask questions instead of disrupting, instead of seeking to attack and go on the offensive. Going a step further, I think it's legitimate for us to have some doubts and hesitations about how far is this war going to go before America's national security or economic interests are at risk. I think that's totally legitimate, just as it's also legitimate to say that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a nefarious, deadly menace that is a threat. There are some people that are seeking to minimize the threat that they were to our nation and our national security, to which I would say, look at what they're doing to our bases throughout the Middle East. Look at which, by the way, those bases exist at the invitation of all the host nations. We didn't exactly occupy all those nations. Those nations want us there to protect them and their interests from the Iranian regime. And so things are a lot more complex than they seem at a surface level. And I'm not even saying I agree fully or disagree. I implore and plead with people to please understand the issues and let's figure out a way as Americans to proceed and move forward even across our differences, because I worry that we've hit the point of no return when it comes to the inability to have civic engagements and discourse in this country.
Okay, well, this is part of a platform to hopefully, engage in that civic discourse. And I want to thank both of you for coming on and having this conversation about peace in the Middle East, the impact, and also, a way for both. There has to be a way for both Israel and the Palestinians to coexist in a very peaceful manner. So I thank you so much for having this conversation, and thank you for everyone who tuned in and to watch this live discussion.